once again, I am Neighborhood News Editor Gary Nager with another Neighborhood News Online special report about the COVID-19 outbreak. And with me again is Peter Pitts, the former Associate Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration and the founder and president of the Center for Medicine and the Public Interest in New York City. Welcome back, Peter. How are you?
My pleasure. Nice to be back.
So, with virtually all states now in at least some phase of reopening, do you feel that we as the American people have done enough to contain COVID-19 with the basically 2-month shutdown of the American economy?
You know, we've learned a lot in a very short time. And now I think what we've learned is that we control our own fate, relative to social distancing, wearing masks, enhanced personal hygiene, and just understanding what we're up against, and also that there's no such thing as 100%. We're not going to be 100% safe. We never have been. Short of a vaccine, nothing's going to be a magic bullet here. I think we understand that as we reopen the economy, we simply have to take responsibility for our own actions, and it's really on us to make it work.
All right. I agree with you. And so you're much more knowledgeable on this stuff than I am. So I just want to be able to review some of the things. Please describe for me some of these following things. Where are we in the United States with testing now? Do we have enough good tests out there? And locally, we were actually told that thousands of tests conducted by one of our local hospitals may not have given reliable results. How's that even possible? And do doctors' offices, hospitals, and testing sites now have the proper tests and all the supplies they need to give those tests?
Okay, so let's talk about testing.
Right.
There are two categories of tests. The first are the tests that tell you whether you have COVID-19. Those tests are incredibly accurate, and they're becoming more and more available in a variety of forms. And they give you results actually pretty quick. And that's going to be incredibly important. One, because obviously if you're ill, you want to be treated properly as quickly as possible. But also as we enter back into the workplace, I suspect that a lot of large buildings, a lot of large companies are going to hire people to test their employees at the office.
Right.
Kind of on-site testing on a regular basis. That's how you keep track of what's going on. And, as a culture, we generally don't stay home when we're sick. And that's never been a good idea. Now it's a really bad idea. So people will be sent home, and you'll have the temperature checks and so on. So that's kind of the first kind of test. So there's good news there. There are a lot of them. And one of the reasons why all of a sudden people are saying, oh my God, why are we seeing all these new infection rates is exactly because we're doing better testing.
Right.
It doesn't mean that the infection rate is higher or lower. It means that we're able to measure it better, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
The second type of test are tests for COVID-19 antibodies. If you test positive for antibodies, it shows that you've had COVID-19 and come out through the other end of the tunnel. Why is this important? 3 reasons. Firstly, you want to know whether or not you have a certain degree of immunity. And there's a new study out yesterday that said that if people get reinfected with COVID-19, they're not contagious. And that's really important because it shows that once you've had the disease the first time and you build up antibodies, the second time you're really just kind of shedding the virus and you're not contagious. That's incredibly important. So it does give you a very important degree of immunity. Most importantly, you're not contagious to everybody else. Secondly, if you want to donate your blood, that can be turned into convalescent plasma, which is being used in hospitals to help people who are seriously ill with the disease kind of get through it quicker and moderate their symptoms. And thirdly, it's a very important data point. Obviously, we want to know who's sick. We want to measure that. We also want to measure who's had it and come through. And importantly, and especially those high-risk groups, older people, people with respiratory conditions and underlying healthcare conditions, if we know they've gotten sick and come through the other end of the tunnel, we realize that even if the most at-risk populations get ill, we can get them through without any serious after effects. So testing is important. Now, the problem with antibody tests, as you alluded to earlier, is there can be a much higher degree of error. Now, no test is perfect, but the FDA has stepped into the breach and pulled a lot of the tests off the market that were of higher rates of error. So, again, we're learning as we're going forward.
Okay, so when you're testing for those antibodies, they're mostly false negatives, though. Is that correct?
That's right. So if the test is wrong and it gives you a negative, it means you might have had the virus, which is not good, but it's better than giving you a false positive to think that you're in the clear. So again, you don't want any errors, But if you do have to settle for an error, better a false negative than a false positive.
And then obviously one of the things we've been hearing the most about is vaccines, including one that seems to have gone now to phase 2 of clinical trials. Are you still hopeful that we can have an actual working, safe, effective vaccine on the market for the general public by the end of this year?
I choose to be a little bit cautious. The data out on these vaccines from a variety of companies is very promising, but it's early data. And of course, better good early data than bad early data. But it's not around the corner. And as far as a vaccine by the end of the year, which is what the president was talking about, I'm not that positive, because you've got to, one, develop the vaccine, then you've got to figure out how to manufacture it to scale, which is not easy, and then you've got to figure out how to prioritize who gets vaccinated first, second, and third. So there are a lot of steps that need to be taken before we're kind of out of the end of the tunnel because of a vaccine. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it happens sooner rather than later, but I still see a vaccine maybe 10 months away optimistically. That's
awesome, though, because certainly that's a lot quicker than what we usually see a vaccine in for any virus. And my understanding is we've never had an effective vaccine against any coronavirus. Is that
That's
correct?
Right. And also the important thing to note here is we don't have to keep the economy closed until we have a vaccine. There are things that we can do right now that facilitate a smart, strategic reopening of the economy. And then when a vaccine becomes available, that's the next stage of the proposition.
Absolutely. Okay. So which vaccines now being investigated are you hearing the best things about? The one that went to phase 2, if you could, the Moderna one, I think it is. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, Moderna, you're hearing about, that's an antibody vaccine. Pfizer, similarly, is an antibody vaccine. There's a company out in LA called Sorrento that's doing some interesting work. But again, the data is so soon, and there's a lot of hyperbole going on. You have to be really careful. We all want to solve the problem completely as quickly as possible. Me too.
Yeah.
But we can't get in the way of actual reality.
Right. And of course, speaking of actual reality, yesterday we heard an announcement that the President of the United States has been taking hydroxychloroquine, in spite of the fact his own medical experts seem to say that wasn't a good idea for people to do. Why would he do it then?
Well, hydroxychloroquine has been around for a long time. Originally, it was a malaria drug. Now it's being used very successfully to treat rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, chronic diseases. The studies for hydroxychloroquine versus COVID-19 are sketchy. Anecdotally, there are some good stories, but the hard, rigorous studies are not as positive. The doctors do, however, have the authority right now to use hydroxychloroquine at their discretion. Largely, the FDA said it should be used for patients who have substantial manifestations of COVID, so serious manifestations, largely patients who are hospitalized. And they're doing that. But again, data, not super positive, and the plural of anecdote isn't data. So why did the president say he was taking hydroxychloroquine? I don't know. I mean, he said he's taking it because he feels that, in his opinion, it has some type of a prophylactic benefit. Zero evidence to support that.
Crazy.
What bothers me is, one, he's going against the best advice and the best public advice of his own public health officials. So that concerns me. It's certainly mixed messages. But most profoundly, this could very realistically cause shortages,
right,
for people that use this drug for arthritis and lupus on a chronic basis. What you don't want, and what will probably happen now, at least for a couple of days, is people are going to rush to their doctors, demand hydroxychloroquine, and doctors are going to have to say, listen, I know the president's taking it. This is not the right thing to do. I'm not going to give it to you. It's going to cause a great deal of angst and frustration for physicians. And that's a unfortunate but very predictable negative consequence of these types of words out of the president's mouth.
Absolutely. And my understanding is that there are side effects of taking hydroxychloroquine, especially long term.
Well, this is very dangerous from a cardiac perspective. Obviously, if you have a heart condition, you're not going to be given hydroxychloroquine. But there's a lot of evidence that shows that people who don't have heart conditions are still getting heart problems because of hydroxychloroquines. And again, there's no prophylactic benefit, and the benefit for those who are most ill is sketchy.
Right.
So all in all, a bad move by the president.
I understand. All right. So what's the latest data you've been hearing about immunity with regards to COVID-19? Does the scientific community now believe that you do have immunity from the virus if you've had it before, if you've recovered from it? And how about if you tested positive for it but never had symptoms? Are we seeing immunity through that as well, or do we just not know yet?
Well, about 20% of people that get COVID-19 are asymptomatic. So, they're going to get the antibodies. You get antibodies whether you were asymptomatic or whether you had a horrible case in the hospital or anywhere in between. The question is, does having the antibodies give you immunity? Now, for most viruses, the answer is yes. It's kind of basic biology. But with COVID-19, we are seeing reinfections. And as we talked about earlier, the good news is that the people who are getting reinfected are not contagious. So even though you may only have a certain degree of immunity, the second time around, you're not contagious, which means that you're not going to be a vector for those around you.
Okay. And then something that I have a young grandson, less than 6 months old. I'm hearing this thing about a syndrome similar to Kawasaki's disease, which actually killed a friend of ours' son at an older age, and that it's related potentially to COVID-19 exposure in kids, and that's the way their bodies are fighting it off. What have you heard in terms of what's going on with that, and how serious a problem is that across the country right now?
Well, the first thing that it's important to communicate is all these very serious, kind of bizarre side effects are being seen in a very, very minute portion of the population. They're incredibly anecdotal. Obviously, any tragedy with kids is news, but the Kawasaki Syndrome it's very few kids. So parents should not be overly concerned about it. But it does show that you want to take precautions with people of any age. And clearly, if you've got small children, you want to do everything that you can. And I think that begins with making sure your kids wear masks. Because when you wear a mask, you're protecting yourself from others as well as protecting others from you.
Right.
And I can't imagine that any parent would not want to protect their kid as much as possible.
But of course, you can't put a mask on a 6-month-old baby, but you can. You're not taking him out that many places right now anyway, but still.
That's right, exactly. But it points to the fact that there's no population that is out of danger's reach when it comes to COVID-19. I see a lot of parents with young kids in the playground. They're not observing social distancing. And I recognize these kids need to blow off some steam, and their parents need to, regain their sanity. But
get outside. Yeah.
Right? But the reality here is it is absolutely not risk-free. And when I see people congregating at beaches or at bars, for example, and we've just now begun to do that, it's foolish.
Right.
This is a new proposition. We have to be extremely cautious, and rushing headlong into the abyss is not the way to be a responsible citizen, let alone a responsible parent.
Gotcha. Okay. So based on that, you're believing that masks, at least for now, should be mandatory in public? And if your answer is yes, how can we stay safe in restaurants and bars if we even come in wearing a mask, but to eat and drink, you have to take the mask off? So sure. How can we do this? Doesn't it go against what seems to be the right thing to do?
Mandatory is a tough word. I don't think that the government making things mandatory facilitate greater adherence to what the right thing to do is. I think the government should point out to us what the best practices are. And then I think we as a community need to exert pressure on our fellow citizens to do the right thing. I mean, clearly, if you're walking into a retail establishment, whether it's a grocery store or a restaurant, you ain't going in without a mask.
Right.
That's just that these places have been out of business too long to risk anything. But beaches, pools, places where people congregate, we have to exert pressure on each other. And in my anecdotal experience, it's people kind of below the age of 30 who are simply not paying attention. And I think it falls on us as the preachy, boring baby boomer adults to point out that they've got to do the right thing, that we will only be as successful as the least responsible member of society.
All right, I agree with that for sure. Okay, so based on everything we've been through, do you think that our country will, going forward, be better prepared for other pandemics, other viruses, other biologics that are attacking our country? Are we moving towards a federal response system rather than just letting all the governors decide for their states what they should be doing in terms of reopening and how to deal with these things?
Well, the best way to deal with the next pandemic is to work to avoid it. So I think that once we're kind of on more of an even keel, we need to do a really significant postmortem on all the things we did and didn't do and when we did them and what worked and what didn't work, and also ramp up the science here, because clearly there's a lot of scientific learning here that we need to exploit going forward. But at the end of the day, I think we have to recognize these things are going to happen. and we need to be prepared.
Obviously, we got to do something because we can't afford to be shutting down the economy for months at a time every year going forward because there's a new virus that's out. So we have to figure out a way to make it work.
Right. And I hope that, if one of the positive consequences of this situation, if there are any, is that we recognize the value of hygiene and the value of vaccines. I mean, let's face it, there are a lot of people out there that don't believe in vaccines, don't want to get their kids vaccinated, won't get a COVID-19 vaccine. And that's a tragic mistake.
Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, so is there anything else that for people down here in Florida, that from your experience in New York, about how we should be looking at the rolling back out? I mean, obviously the last things that have opened are bars, bars after restaurants. Bars are still not open, but gyms and tattoo parlors and places like that are very popular in Florida. What can we do going forward? Anything else that you can offer us in terms of sage advice from where you're sitting at ground zero there?
Sure. Let's think about restaurants, and you're the expert there. I really think that retail establishments are going to have to figure it out on their own, figure out best practices and strategies, and learn from each other. And there's no way there's going to be a government bureau of restaurant safety for COVID.
Right.
Each individual restaurant is configured differently. They have different types of customer base. Their serving mechanisms are different. But clearly less density. Clearly, eating outside is safer than eating inside. And people are going to have to simply create a risk-benefit analysis for themselves. Some people aren't going to be comfortable, and that's their right, and they're not going to go out, and so be it. Others will be more risk-friendly, and they'll go out. I certainly fall into that category. But nothing's 100%, and that's a hard nut for people to swallow.
All right, Peter. Well, tell us once again about your book and where people can get it, because, you're coming on here and helping me like you've helped CNN and Fox News and OAN and 700 Club, and I appreciate that. So tell me where people can find out more about your organization and the books that you've got out there.
Oh, thank you for asking. The book is called Common Sense Healthcare Policy for Common Sense Americans, parenthetically, and Presidential Candidates. Mm-hmm. There are no easy fixes here. And the Center for Medicine and the Public Interest is where I work, and that's cmpi.org. A lot of good information there, a lot of interviews from other places, including yours. And we invite people to come and check it out.
All right. Well, Mrs. Bodycomb, I'm sure, is very proud of both of us for trying to get the word out, keeping people informed.
Think of it this way. Our kindergarten teacher in that picture, we're older than she is now. So that's kind of scary.
That is scary. You are correct. Peter Pitts, Center for Medicine and the Public Interest, and fellow Hewlett High School alum. Thank you so much for being on with me today on Neighborhood News Online. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Stay safe and stay alert.
Same to you. Thank you, sir. Thanks.